wasn't the most prominent in the class. He didn't seem different from the rest. He was average. Not too tall, not too short. Not too thin, not too fat. He sat silently in the middle, took his seat, listened to the lessons, and tried not to attract attention. Sometimes he laughed with the guys, sometimes he made fun of someone, but without anger. That's how it was until that day. Her name was just She. She was the same girl who sat by the window, always pulling her hand out in class, but never taking part in the conversation at recess. She was called weird in class, sometimes a weirdo, but he never paid much attention to her. Until one day at recess, he decided to play a prank. "Hey, you there," he said, winking at his friends. "Why don't you go out and get some air? Or, do you have another theory on how to transfer your homework?" Laughter rang through the classroom. All she did was look up at him, just looked, and he felt something strange. There was no aggression or surprise in her eyes, just emptiness. The kind of look that makes you stop for a second. She was silent, and it was frightening. That night he thought it was nothing. Just another joke, that's all. But something was wrong. He didn't notice how his surrounding reality began to change. It was as if the whole world had faded, a strange heaviness. And suddenly, it was as if the air had shrunk, and his legs couldn't stand. When he opened his eyes, the world was huge, totally different than he knew it to be. He was lying on a wooden surface. The surroundings were empty, shadows from school things falling to the floor. He tried to get up, but it felt strange. Everything felt too distant and huge. At one point, looking up, he saw her. She was standing in front of him, huge, like a giant. Her face was calm, but cold as stone. He tried to say something, but his voice was barely audible. He rose, but her hand was in front of him, and she lifted him effortlessly with her fingers like a toy. "I don't understand," she said, looking at him as if he were a rare animal. "Why you're so cocky when you're so small." There was no anger in her eyes, only infinite curiosity, as if she didn't understand what it was like to be helpless. She put him in the box. The box was small but big enough for him to have a few steps within its walls. She set up a small chair for him to sit on and watched him. Sometimes took out her notebook and wrote something down. Sometimes she just remained silent. He tried to resist, cursed her, screamed at her, begged her to let go, but she was silent, just watching. And every day his world grew smaller and smaller, and her gaze grew colder and colder. She was in no hurry to release him. Sometimes she changed his location. Today he was in a box, tomorrow in an empty cup, the next night in her palm, where he could feel her huge fingers leisurely stroking his body as if playing with him. He didn't know how much time had passed. The clock was losing its meaning. He no longer knew how he'd ended up in this trap, but he knew one thing for sure. Everything was his fault. He was the one who had insulted her. He was the one who had played a joke on her. And now, he was her plaything. After a while, however, his perspective on the situation began to change. He was no longer fighting back. The fear that had previously paralyzed him was replaced by something strange. He began to notice her habits. How she would often stop by his place, set out food, and sit silently by his side as if she were enjoying his suffering. Sometimes she would hold out her hand for him to climb into her palm, and she would lift him up to her face, and all he could do was remain silent. Silently watch her laugh or just smirk as she looked at his tiny body. For a moment, it seemed to him that he couldn't be human anymore at all. Everything about him had changed. He began to understand her. He began to see the world through her eyes. And then one day, when she placed him in her palm again and said, almost imperceptibly, "You've changed," he realized she was right. He was not the same. He didn't know how to get out anymore. Perhaps he didn't want to. After all, who but she could understand him so well? Who but she had power over him? And the sensation was both frightening and liberating. She spoke to him softly, almost in a whisper. "You know now what it means to be small. You need to appreciate what you have. Otherwise, you'll always be trapped." He fell silent. There was no longer emptiness in her eyes. There was some kind of answer there that he was only beginning to realize.